Grade 11, choice 2. Half an hour 3.
Thank you, Isabella.
Half an hour 3.
No, that's correct. It is half hour 3. So I think this is where we got to. Maybe we didn't. Maybe we got much further on.
No.
Okay. All right. So the cerebrum is referred to as the seat of...
She must be what started, Tori.
What, Tony?
Ma'am, the screen's a little wonky. Thank you, ma'am. Perfect. Thank you.
See, Natalie's dead quiet. Natalie doesn't... You don't even know Nats is there. But now Tony, on the other hand...
Tasting about me is the loudest, ma'am.
Mute your microphone. Tony, listen to something I said. That's cause for concern. Okay. It's the seat of... Thank you for telling me, Tony. Otherwise, I wouldn't have realized, my angel. So it's the seat of
Thank you, ma'am.
higher mental activities. So that means intelligence, all the stuff your mother says you haven't got yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not wrong.
Memory, judgment, etc. Okay, you happy with that? It's also the seat of will. So it controls all voluntary activities. Like I sit here going, should I throw this really heavy plaster of Paris object at the child who's annoying me? Or shouldn't I? That comes from the frontal lobe of the cerebellum.
Ma'am,
Yes, Tony.
joke's on you. You can't throw it at me. I'm behind the screen. Okay, that's all I'm saying. Okay, bye.
If it was a school computer, I could throw it at you, but it's my own personal laptop, so I won't. Okay. All right. Also, the cerebrum receives and interprets sensory impulses such as sight, hearing, smell, touch, and taste. So remember, I showed you where on the cerebrum all the sensations were received and interpreted. Remember, it's in a line down like that, except vision, which is at the back. Okay?
That's ironic. If vision's at the back.
I know, it's so far from your eyes. I know, I also always think that. I think it's the only reason why I remember it's there. Okay, so remember, that's where all movements are initiated, and that's where all sensory data is interpreted, other than vision, which is at the back. Okay, right, we're okay with that. And then remember that the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body, and the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body. So we spoke about the fact that if somebody has a stroke in the left cerebral hemisphere, the effect would be felt on the right side of the body. Okay, all right. So this is just showing a photograph of what the brain looks like from below. So you need to watch carefully while I show you, Jess, how this is. So if there was an individual standing like this, and I cut the top of the cranium off, and I took the brain and pulled it out together with the spinal cord, and then turned it like that.
What?
Mute your microphone. What, love?
Are you holding that little plastic brain thing?
No, I'm holding a really heavy plaster Paris brain thing. No, a cranium.
Okay.
A cranium. Can't you see me?
I can't. That's what I see is from like slightly above, what is it called, an elbow and up.
What's it called?
Up to it.
Okay?
I just see the top of the head skull, the little, now the eyeballs. Perfect thing. I see the whole thing. That's great. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. So if I had Tony standing in front of me here, okay, and she's facing in that direction, and I took a chainsaw and I sawed the top of her cranium off and I threw that away, and then I ripped the brain out together with the spinal cord. So I ripped it upwards, pulled the spinal cord with it, and then I turned it that way. that is what you are seeing on the screen at the moment. Okay, so it's the brain sort of from underneath like that. And you can see various parts of the brain on this, Tones. Can you see this?
Yes, ma'am, perfect. Oh, I still have a mouthful of hot dogs. But anyway, I can still
Okay, great. So what you can then see is, this is obviously the frontal part of the brain, even though you're looking at it from underneath. So that's the frontal part of the brain, okay? This would be temporal, and that would be temporal, and then the occipital would be above. This is the cerebellum you're seeing here. Remember, the cerebellum is this part of the brain that you see is shown green here. Okay, you happy with that? And that's very important. We'll talk about that later on. So that's what you're seeing there. You're seeing cerebellum there and cerebellum there. And then what you can see here is actually spinal cord. So spinal cord for that part. Then this is still part of the hind brain. So the pons Medulla and Medulla Oblongata are there. But we'll talk about that more just now. But what's quite nice about this thing is it shows you the remnants of the optic nerve. So there you can see the optic nerve there from this eye, and the optic nerve there from that eye. So the eye would be situated underneath here. Okay, towards the front there, the eye, and then the optic nerve from the eye goes there, and then it goes to the occipital lobe at the back there. Optic nerve to the occipital lobe at the back there. Okay, you okay with that? Do you understand that? Okay. All right.
Is a nose also like have sensory neurons or
Yes. Yeah.
to the brain, so it can like smell?
Yes.
Okay.
In that
It's
that
all wired.
band. Yes, absolutely. And it's one place where there are bipolar neurons. So they're actually quite funny because they hang down into the nose with their dendrites down into the nose, and the cell body and the axon goes through the bone that's at the top of the nasal cavities and just connects straight to the brain there. Anyway, so this thing also shows frontal, temporal. This swelling here is called the pons Medullae, and you don't have to know about that. This swelling here is Medulla Oblongata. You do have to know about that. And here's the spinal cord. But what you can see very nicely in this one is cerebellum. Okay, all right, and that's looking at it from underneath. So this then longitudinal section through the skull, I have to be quite honest, this looks like a person who has
Underbite.
fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, because this brain looks a bit small unless the picture squashed from back to front. But I do think, yeah, this is problematic. Okay, what you can see really nicely here is the cerebellum. Okay, you can see the cerebrum, and then the corpus callosum is very nice as well. There's the corpus callosum there. Okay, right, you happy with that? Okay, then what you can see coming down from the brain, so this is the pons Medullae. So if you look, let's work from this way upwards. So there's the spinal cord. Okay, the spinal cord has got two swellings. Where the spinal cord becomes the hind brain, there are two swellings, two regions with those. There are, swellings. The bottom one that is not as big as the one above it is the Medulla Oblongata. The one above it is the pons Medullae, or pons, and it's bigger than the Medulla Oblongata. You don't have to know about the pons. You nothing, no knowledge at all about the pons. I wouldn't ever even ask you to label the pons, because it's just, you don't learn anything about it in grade 11. So if I show you only one swelling and I ask you questions about it, then just call it the medulla oblongata and answer questions as if it's the medulla oblongata. But the medulla oblongata is not as big a swelling as the pons vorolia. Okay, right, you're happy with that. So what you can see very nicely here is that the spinal cord is a continuation of the brain. So the meninges would be around the outside of the brain and they would just carry on around the spinal cord. You can also see really nicely that the spinal cord goes down through the center of the vertebral bones. Okay, you can see a half a vertebral bone here and the other half of it here, half, etc. So that just shows you that the vertebral bone completely surrounds the spinal cord. It goes down through the center. Okay, you remember that from last year. Okay, you're right with that. Okay. Then the other thing that you do need to know, and it's really, really relevant for next year, is that the spinal cord leaves the cranium through this big opening here. Do you remember?
Foramen Magnum.
Foramen Magnum. Okay, you happy with that? And that's going to be really important in grade 12 when you talk about evolution. Absolutely. That the evidence for bipedal locomotion is the position of the foramen magnum.
Our dogs is here.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, you're happy with that? And so you'll see it in, so one of the things that you'll have to be able to do next year is look at a series of skull drawings and be able to put them into sequence from least evolved to most evolved. And the one thing you look at is the position of the foramen magnum, and another thing that you look at is how the slope of the frontal bone, because remember that shows you if it's very sloped backwards like that as opposed to very vertical, it shows you less developed frontal lobe, most developed frontal lobe. And so that kind of thing you will also be able to do. But there are lots of other things concerning with the structure of the skull that tells you whether something is, oh, sorry guys, foramen magnum.
Now, oh yeah, I forgot my question for a second there. Do you have real skulls? Are you allowed to have real skulls?
Yeah-ish.
Maar isn't it you have to get special permission?
Yeah.
You have to get
Yeah.
access to some museums and...
Yeah. The issue is that many of the real skeletons that schools have, they got before those laws were brought in. So schools which do have real skeletons and real skulls, they have had them since before the time, before the...
Who do we have? Does Mrs. Friends have?
I don't think so.
Just bones.
Just
Like animal bones. But
Yeah, I mean, I've got bones,
No,
look,
they don't.
but I don't think I've got a...
I mean, all human bones, right? Animals, yeah, cool, but we don't know about the humans.
But we're animals, you know that.
Yeah.
Because the alternative is you're a
But
plant. If you want to be a vegetable, I'm fine with that, but I personally am a little bit above a vegetable.
Now I'm trying to show you the Foramen Magnum and that flipping whatever that thing is. Like it's hard. Like you need that thing. That's what I'm saying. The real ones.
It's at the back.
Oh. No, it's fine. One day
Good.
I'll give you a real one.
Okay, right. See, this really looks like a Neanderthal.
Why
Okay.
is this bottom jaw so large?
Yeah, I have no idea. And look at this, the chin is actually quite very strange. Okay, anyway, moving on. So obviously this is a medial longitudinal section, and you don't have to learn all these parts. Please don't go learn all those parts unless you're a nana. Okay? And so looking at the spinal cord here, okay, there's the medulla oblongata, and there's the pons vorolia. Okay, big bump. Right, so there's a really good corpus callosum. Okay, and the cerebellum at the back there.
Man, what's inside that gap?
There, there.
Is that like a hole?
Yeah, lateral ventricle. That's ventricle 1 or 2.
Is there something inside or is it like hollow?
Cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, right. And then you can see this section here was taken at that level. Okay, and all you can really see here nicely is grey matter on the outside and white matter on the inside. Okay, all right. The hypothalamus, this is important, and this is important for next year. So when you deal with the hormones next year, you will learn that the hypothalamus is really, really, really important in the whole, it's sort of has master control over the secretion of hormones from other glands,
So it controls the glands.
the endocrine glands, the ones that secrete hormones to a certain extent. Okay, so it's situated between the two cerebral hemispheres and it forms the floor of the third ventricle. So remember, there's a ventricle 1 and 2 in each cerebrum, connected by a little canal to, in the middle, ventricle 3. And the floor of the ventricle, the third ventricle, is the hypothalamus. Okay, so if we look at where it's situated here, all right, so there's the third ventricle, and then the floor of the third ventricle is the hypothalamus. Okay, it contains the centers for regulating body temperature, regulation of blood pressure, sleep, appetite, thirst, and emotions. Okay. Okay, this is blue, so you don't have to learn it. But remember that when you learned about ADH, you learned that ADH is made in the hypothalamus, but it passes from the hypothalamus down to the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland, which functions to store it, doesn't make it. So it's not entirely accurate to say the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland secretes ADH. I would just say posterior lobe of the pituitary gland releases ADH because it's made in the hypothalamus, stored in the posterior lobe, released by the posterior lobe. You're going to learn next year the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland makes its own hormones and releases them. So there you can say secretes, but the posterior lobe, it's better to just say releases.
Talking about excretion, in our test on Monday, are there going to be lots of multiple choice or they are all writing questions? It's socrative. The socrative test. So are there going to be lots of multiple choice questions or not?
Balance.
What other questions are there?
Well, sometimes
Socrative, you can.
There's
have
true or
virtual
false
answers.
There's true and false, and there's give the correct term. It's mostly multiple choice. I think, if I remember correctly, there are a few give the correct term, and there are a few true and false. Do me a huge favour, because the grade 8s have just written a socrative. And where I ask a question like, give me the correct term for the male organ that makes sperm, then they write, the male organ which makes sperm is the testes. It's situated outside the body. And Socrates doesn't recognize that, it gives a naught. Okay. Bye, Tony Maloney. Bye, Max.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye, Natalie.
End of the third lesson. Choice to Gr11. Got